You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 80. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there, and welcome to the Balanced Educator Podcast. We are so excited that you're here again with us this week. We love spending this time with you. All right, so I want you to go ahead and raise your hand if you've ever been stuck lesson planning well into the evening, or worse yet, late on a Sunday night, trying to get your things in order for the next day. This can feel so stressful. Lesson planning can be both daunting and incredibly time-consuming. You have so much to organize, so much to think about, so many different outcomes to try to incorporate, and so much searching on the internet a lot of the time to get inspiration and find fun, new, interesting lessons to bring into your classroom and make learning fun with your students. The problem is when we're stuck lesson planning in the evenings and weekends, it can feel like our job is completely taking over our life and like we have no time for a personal life or self-care. It makes us push off everything involved with caring for ourselves to maybe the weekends, or worse yet, saving it for Christmas break or for the summertime. This is not living a balanced life. So we've invited Caitlin from EB Academics and the Teaching Middle School ELA podcast onto the show today to help you reduce lesson planning stress. Caitlin is going to teach you how to use the balanced teaching approach to lesson plan for your entire school year so that you can get your evenings and weekends back and enjoy your personal life again. Before we get into this awesome interview that I know you're going to get so much value out of, we want to pause to thank our awesome sponsor, Free Label, for supporting the show. We have been working on simplifying our lives over the last couple of years, and we've been really enjoying simplifying our wardrobes to buy less clothing, but choosing better pieces that last a long time, that are flattering, and that we feel really good in. Free Label has made this so easy. Free Label's clothing fits many different body types. They're expanding their size range to really be inclusive in their sizing. And all of their pieces are such amazing quality. They're all made in Canada and are so thoughtfully designed. They're just so comfortable, and tiny little details have been taken care of so that you can feel good in the clothing. On our podcast cover, you'll see me wearing the Reese Wrap pants. I actually have bought 2 pairs of these pants in 2 different fabrics because I'm so obsessed with them. When I travel to go to workshops and to teach at different schools, I always pack my Reese Wrap pants because they go with everything. They don't wrinkle in my suitcase, and I know that no matter how I'm feeling that day, they're gonna fit well and feel comfortable, whether I'm teaching a yoga class or whether I'm standing in front of an audience teaching a workshop on mindfulness in the classroom. You guys have to check out Free Label. Go to www.educalm.com/freelabel to check out this awesome brand and pick up some pieces for yourself. Again, that's educalm.com/freelabel. All right, guys, let's get into this awesome interview with Caitlin from EB Academics. Hello there, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being on the Balanced Educator podcast today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be talking about just lesson planning and reducing stress in our lives and calming ourselves in as best of a way as possible as teachers because life is crazy as a teacher.
It truly is. And I think that's why I was drawn to you the second I heard an episode of your podcast, which is Teaching Middle School ELA.
Yes. Yes.
So good. I felt like you were speaking to my tribe because you're talking about, stress and overwhelm and how busy life as a teacher can be and how we tend to put our personal lives on hold during the school year. And that's what we're always talking about on our podcast and with our community too, is how to find that elusive balance, how to find ways to enjoy life while you're in the process of teaching and not just putting life aside. Now,
yes, absolutely.
The cool thing with you is that you and your business partner, you guys approach this problem a little bit differently than how we approach the problem. So here on the Balanced Educator podcast, we talk about self-care, about mindfulness, about paying attention to our thoughts and emotions and perspective to help us to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful throughout the year, even during those ups and downs. But you approach it from another way that we think is so important, and that's organizing your lesson plans and having your things in order. So I'm so excited to have you on today to talk about that.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about it too. I'm super passionate about that because I think just being organized is hugely beneficial for so many things in your life.
Totally, totally. So before we get into it, can you just tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Caitlin Mitchell, and I am one half of the company called EB Academics. Jessica is my business partner, and she's kind of the behind the scenes person. So when you listen to our podcast or you follow us on Instagram, you'll see mostly my face. And we just share resources, online professional development, free online workshops, just all kinds of content. We even have a membership specifically geared toward middle school English language arts teachers. And that's not to say that some of our content on our podcast won't help your younger grade teachers, but that really is our main focus, are those middle school English language arts teachers.
That's awesome. So what led you to creating EB Academics?
So that's a long story. There have been many iterations of the company, but Jessica and I actually taught together at a school in Los Angeles, and we were both just lovers of English language arts, and we sat down together one year and we're like, we should run a summer camp at our school for reading and writing. It'd be a great way to help our students. It'd be a great way for us to make some extra money in the summer because we weren't getting paid in the summer. And it was incredibly successful. We ran 4 weeks. We had 30 students each week. It was great for the school. It was great for the kids. It was great for us. It was just great all around. And so there was one day where we were looking at each other and we're like, we should help other teachers do this same thing. So that's how EB Academics really started. The first iteration of it was EB Academic Camps. And we had summer reading and writing camps across the country for a couple of summers. And it just didn't really work the way that we had envisioned. And so we had to kind of pivot and shift where we were taking the company. And so we started selling resources on Teachers Pay Teachers. And then it's evolved more from there to offer online professional development courses for teachers. And then, of course, our monthly membership for teachers as well. So it's kind of taken on many different forms, but that's where we are today.
That's awesome. So after listening to just one episode of your podcast, you were talking about this free training series that you had that was running in the summertime. And I was like, I have to listen to this. And the information you shared was so good that I knew. I reached out before I even finished the training series. I was like, I need to get you on the podcast to share this with our audience because it is so good. So,
well, thank you.
Can you tell us how, you balance your life with lesson planning and teaching, and how do you use the balanced teaching approach to remove some of that stress that you get as a teacher?
Yes, that's a great question. So I will say that the first probably 5 years of teaching was not balanced in my life at all. It was just difficult to really get the reins of what I was supposed to be doing, and I didn't really have a mentor, and it was just a difficult situation. And so again, sitting down with Jessica, when we were working together, we were like, okay, how can we ameliorate some of this stress in our lives? Like, what is the first step in making sure that everything is just clearly laid out for us, because I think a lot of the times when we have everything in our head, we can't really see that in real life. Like, how does that transpire into real life? And so we sat down and we're like, okay, the first thing we really need to do is take some of the things that we learned in college of, our year-long scope and sequence. And so we sat down and said, okay, that's really the first step, is looking at the year-long of what my lesson plans are going to be like, the rough sketch of where I'm going to do things, where I'm going to teach things, where certain standards are going to fit throughout the school year, et cetera. Well, that's great, right? But it doesn't paint the whole day-to-day picture for us. So then we need to break it down even further. And how are we going to start our days? How are we going to end our days, so that we have some consistency every single day for us, but also for our students? People thrive when they know what's happening and what's coming and what they're expected to do. And then beyond that, how do we take this idea of what we call the into, through, and beyond? And you may have heard of that in your master's classes or something like that. And implement that into our lesson planning for each day. So not only do we have like the full year planned out for us, now we can break down each unit based around this into, through, and beyond lens, and marry our lesson plans into that in a way that I can step back from my scope and sequence and be like, okay, I know what I'm doing pretty much on any given day in the school year. And so I'm not spending a ton of time lesson planning the night before or staying awake until 12 a.m. like I used to do when I taught high school. And I'm not spending all day Sunday lesson planning or grading papers. Like, it's very clear to me that I know exactly what I'm doing on every single day, and I have all of my lesson plans ready to go. So I can relax and I can enjoy my life outside of teaching. And so that is just really kind of the huge, almost like a mindset shift of looking at your lesson planning, not just as lesson planning day to day or week to week, but as a whole. In the summer, you should take your time to do that, or at the end of each marking period or something like that.
That's great. I think that makes so much sense. And when I went to university, we were taught how to do that. We used a little bit of different language when we were talking about the scope and sequence. We did long-term planning, short-term planning is what we called it. And then the into, through, beyond, we called it the pre-activity, the activity, and the post-activity. But I also really like how you talked about having routine in your day, and what does, like, when we're looking at the long term, then when we zoom into the short term, what is that sequence that the day goes in? And we just recently finished a 5-part series on the podcast where we were talking about the importance of routine, because when our brain is constantly having to adjust to newness, it's very overwhelming, and it takes so much energy for our brain to have to adapt to something new all the time. So when we're in our classroom and we can create solid routines for ourselves and for our students, that actually allows our body to go through the motions of the routines and the habits we've already created, and frees up brain space to actually learn new things. So I love that you talked about that. Now, can you explain how you, as a middle school ELA teacher, teach to have those routines in the classroom? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we use what are called bell ringers. Some teachers call them do now or warm-ups or something like that. And so we want to start the class every single day the same way, just like how you were talking about the importance of routine. But beyond just the brain space and freeing that up for our students, it creates just a calm environment for our classroom every single day when students walk in, because they know exactly what they're supposed to do. They have a daily bell ringer that they're going to come in and spend the first 5 minutes of class completing. So when they walk into the classroom, they sit down at their desk, they take out their bell ringer, and they begin working. There doesn't need to be any sort of, waiting for Mrs. Mitchell to give us direction or waiting to know what we're supposed to be doing. It's very, very clear. So when they walk in, it's all calm, everybody's relaxed. I'm able to address any situations with a specific student that I might need to talk to before the class starts. I'm able to take attendance. I am very calm. So as soon as the bell ringer, those 5 minutes end and we move into what we're doing, everyone's just in a really good mind space. Everyone's in a good place because no one's yelling. There isn't a ton of noise. There's not a lot going on. It's just a very smooth transition into our class period. And then something else that that Jessica and I both started implementing was ending the day with sustained silent reading. So I know some teachers do it at the beginning instead of bell ringers. So, I mean, it works in any capacity, however a teacher decides to set it up in their classroom. But we found that ending the class period with the sustained silent reading, again, is that nice bookend to our class period where it's calm. Students are able to leave in a very, just organized fashion in a calm manner. And I always tell my students when they leave, like, thank you so much. And when they have read first, they're just in a different place. Like it's hard to explain to you what that looks like until you actually see it in real life, just the difference that makes in ending your class. And so those bookends of each day and those clear expectations of what's happening at the beginning and the end of each class has made a huge difference in just the calm environment in our classrooms.
That's great. We get so many questions about how to create smoother and calmer transitions. And we always talk about the importance of routine so that the students know exactly what a transition should look like. So you've really built that into your class structure. The transitions are calm because they're coming in, they know what's happening, they know what's expected of them, and it's just easy for them to settle into that routine. And then when they leave, it's calm and seems like this structure really will help teachers to accomplish those smooth transitions.
Yes. And I mean, it works for me too, because I'm very, like we had talked about before we started recording, I'm very type A, very just, I like things specific, and that's just my personality. And so having an organized classroom just makes things a lot easier for me in terms of being able to teach the content for my mind and the way that I operate. But also I feel like that really benefits my students because, like you're saying, they like structure. Students need structure. They need clearly set expectations in order for them to flourish and in order for them to succeed.
Yeah, that's great. So can you give me an example of what a bell ringer activity would be?
Yeah. So, I mean, many of your listeners have probably seen bell ringers online and things like that. So I had used bell ringers in the past, not in the same strategic way that I've most recently started using them. So it used to be like a Monday musing where I would give them a journal question and they would write. And it was fine. Like it totally worked, but I didn't feel like it was enhancing and supporting my curriculum in terms of all of the Common Core state standards for ELA that I needed to address. And so Jessica and I actually sat down one summer and we're like, look, how can we make bell ringers more beneficial for our classrooms? How can we make them and create them in such a way that's going to support everything that we're doing? And so we created bell ringers in such a way that students are working on a different skill every day throughout the school year, but then those skills also spiral throughout the year. So for example, 1 week might be focused on specific grammar standards. So they might be working on simple sentences Monday, complex sentences Tuesday, compound sentences Wednesday, etc. Well, then they'll see that skill again in 2 months so that they're working on that skill again. Or 1 week might be focused specifically on narrative writing. And so it's not like we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. They're working on a different skill in the classroom that we've maybe already taught, previously within our curriculum, but now they're reviewing it again. And that has really helped build this strong foundation for our students in terms of hitting and addressing all of the Common Core state standards for ELA that we have to address as English language arts teachers, which is so many standards. If you've ever had a chance to look at them, it's a lot. And so building that bell ringer in such a way that does that for students has been a game changer for us and has made them extremely effective for our classroom.
That's really awesome. I love that spiraling approach where it's coming back and they're getting that review. Repetition is so, so, so key for learning.
Yes.
That's great.
And one thing before we go on, I do want to say that I have 3 free weeks of our bell ringers that I can give to your listeners.
Awesome.
I can give you the link for that later if you'd like me to, and you can put it in your show notes or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that our listeners will love that. Thank you so much for offering that.
Yes.
So that will be
no problem.
That will be in the show notes. So for you guys listening, go to podcast.educalm.com and you'll find episode number 80 to get the show notes.
Cool.
Awesome. So let's move on to really going through the specifics of each of your steps of what this lesson planning is going to look like so that we can set ourselves up for success to reduce that stress and overwhelm and not be last minute planning all the time.
Right. The first thing that you want to do is you want to start with your year-long planning. So your long-term scope and sequence. And so I like to break that down by unit. So I teach novel units. I know some teachers teach around themes. So however your classroom or your curriculum or your school district has you set it up, obviously you need to follow that framework. But I lay it into my school calendar. So, I'll put all the dates for the school events and things like that into my long-term planning, my scope and sequence. And then I'll take each unit and, layer that unit in. So if I'm looking at the house on Mango Street, I know that unit is going to take me 4 or 5 weeks to complete. So I'll put literally, day 1, I'm going to introduce the house on Mango Street using this specific activity. Day 2, I'm going to do this all the way through the whole entire unit until the end of that unit, which would be our test, our in-class essay, and whatever culminating group project that I have in conjunction with that unit. And then what else I do that's really important in long-range planning and your scope and sequence is leaving what we call flex days. So those are just like blank days at the end of a unit. I leave 1 or 2 per unit that are just empty. There's nothing there because so often something will come up or, I won't be able to complete a specific activity in the allotted time frame that I had. I'll have to move it to the next day. And so that flex space allows you that kind of breathing room so you don't feel stressed out like you have to complete everything on each given day, which causes us stress, which we don't need. So those flex days are incredibly important. So I'll lay out each unit in that way. And then after I lay out the unit, I'll then layer in the standards. Okay, well, on day 2, I'm going to be talking specifically about dialogue in a text. And I'll look at that standard and what that standard wants me to address. And I'll put that on my calendar, standard, reading for literature, whatever it is, 8.6, I'm not sure off the top of my head. And I'll put that in there, just, the standard, just not the whole description of it, but just that RL 8.6. And so I'll be able to see which standards I've included where throughout the year. And then I have a little checklist with me as I do it, and I check off each standard. And then I'll be able to look at all the standards and see which standard have I not incorporated in my year-long planning. And then I'll go back and see, okay, where would that standard work? In what unit? How could I add a different activity somewhere so that I'm able to incorporate that standard? Now, I will say that in doing this, I hit multiple standards multiple times throughout the school year. It's not like I'm just hitting one standard once and then that's it and we forget about it and we never see it again. So it is an art. I feel like it is kind of an art form in figuring out how it's all laid out. So in our workshop this summer, I actually walked through on a PowerPoint, on a slide with, our workshop and showed teachers what that looked like. So we are actually going to be offering the workshop again in the fall. So I will let you know when that happens so you can let your listeners know as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Visually see this. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching that training sequence. I thought it was so helpful, and I think it can really help teachers to actually sit down and do it, to actually set aside that time and be like, okay, today we're working on this.
Right.
And it makes it feel less overwhelming.
For sure. And I think that when you hit on something that's really important is that you have to do the work. Like, it's all great in theory when we're thinking about it, in our minds, but to actually sit down and set aside time, it does take time. It is going to take you a little bit of time to do all of this. But what you are doing is you are setting yourself up for success. You are ensuring that you're going to have a less stressful school year because you aren't going to be waiting until the last minute to plan something for the next day. And yes, the front load work is intense. But it is 100% worth it to have a smooth school year where you can focus on other things that need your attention that aren't frantically planning for a grammar lesson on Wednesday.
I 100% agree. It's so worth taking, a week, even if it takes a week for you to do this, take that week before your students are in your classroom and when you actually have the energy to be doing it. And then you can let that help you sail smoothly through the rest of the year. So you have less of that last minute frantic, oh my gosh, I have to get this done for tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So we've looking at your entire year and then making sure that we include all the standards. So in the US, you guys call it standards. In Canada, we call it learning outcomes. So we put in all those learning outcomes, make sure we're reaching everything more than once. Then do we zoom in more after that?
Yes, so we take it from the macro level to the micro level. So that's the macro level looking at the full year. Well, then to make our day-to-day planning easier, that's why we have those bookends that you and I had previously talked about. So now I'm going to zoom in and look at each day. So let's say I'm going to look at September 12th, whatever day that is on my scope and sequence, and I'm teaching chapter 1 of House on Mango Street on that day. That's all I know so far of what I'm doing when I laid in my scope and sequence. Well, now I want to plan for that day. So I'm going to layer in my bell ringer in the beginning and my sustained silent reading at the end. And so now I've, covered 10 minutes of that class period, and however long your class period is, you'd have to adjust for what works best for you. And then I know, okay, I have 50 more minutes of time that we can address specific content around chapter 1 in the house on Mango Street. And so I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm just going to put the bell ringers all throughout my school year and the sustained silent reading all throughout my school year. And so that's kind of like taking it down even further. Well, after I've done that second step of creating whatever bookends around my days that I want to create, now I'm going to go to the complete micro level. Like I'm all the way zoomed in. And now I'm looking at my into lessons, my through lessons, and my beyond lessons. So we can talk about that next. You want me to give you some examples of what this would look like? Okay.
I would love that.
So let's talk about an into lesson first. So for example, before I would start House on Mango Street, so I might be on my day 1 of that unit that I've created for my scope and sequence, I now want to create a fun activity to introduce this unit to my students. And I do something that we call popcorn predictions. And how that works is I'll give each of my students a strip of paper that has a sentence on it from the book. And every student in my class will get a different sentence, and they get a recording sheet to make a prediction about what the text is going to be about based on that one sentence that I gave them. So they make their first prediction. Well, then they pop around the classroom, popcorn. So they stand up and go find a partner, and they switch sentences. And now they have a second piece of information to make a prediction about the text. So they'll make a second prediction. And then I have them do that for about 4 different switches. So they have 4 different predictions, and then we share out our predictions as a class. So it gets them interested in what it is that we're going to read. And, then they can decide if, or as they're reading, they can see their prediction unfold if it's correct. And it just creates some sort of just interest. It generates that interest in the text that we're reading. So I always, for each new unit, will have some sort of fun or engaging into lesson with my students. So I would put that on my schedule of day 1, House on Mango Street, popcorn predictions activity, and have, that ready to go in my computer or wherever that document lives. Then I would layer in my through lessons. So my through lessons are the ones that are going to address specific standards. So a through lesson for, let's move to like the lottery is a short story unit that I do. So one of our through lessons for the lottery has students focus specifically on suspense and foreshadowing. And they have a fun interview game that they do they take on the role of a certain character, and they talk about suspense and foreshadowing in the text. So it's a lesson that really like gets deep into the content of the text, and addresses specific standards that you've created those activities around. So I know as I'm saying this, people are going to be like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. And to be honest, like it is, as you're planning it, it is a lot of work, but it is 100% doable. And it's going to make your teaching life a lot easier when you have just these clear things that you are supposed to do and kind of layer into your curriculum as you're creating your lessons for the school year. So that's an into activity, a through activity, and then a beyond activity, like you were saying, is kind of, what did you guys call it up there?
The post activity.
The post activity. Yeah. Okay. So the beyond lesson takes it to where students are really doing something on their own with what they've learned. So this might be something like a group project or an individual project, a test, just a basic reading comprehension test. I always give my students a complete in-class essay. They write a multi-paragraph essay for every single unit that we do. So those types of activities are all those through lessons where you're really assessing their knowledge of the content and the standards that you've taught. So those generally come obviously at the end of a unit. So when you kind of layer those in, you'll see the into happens obviously at the beginning, the through lessons happens throughout the content, and then the beyond lessons happen at the very end once you've finished the unit and students are showing their knowledge to you of what they've learned.
Right. So then the into, through, and beyond wouldn't necessarily happen in one class. This is something that you're doing over time.
Correct. It can happen in one class if you're doing like one standard on one day and that day is focused specifically on that. But the way that we're talking about it now in this regard, yes, it's over a period of time that would occur.
Perfect. That's so helpful. So as you had mentioned a couple times, like it does take a lot of work to do this. You really have to sit down and put the energy into this, and it could definitely feel overwhelming. So I'm thinking right now of like a first year teacher that's going, I don't really know how long this activity is going to take. What would you suggest to a beginning teacher that isn't quite sure how long something is going to take to get started with this framework so they at least have a starting point?
Yes, I think that's a great question. Well, first of all, I mean, when we do our balanced teaching approach again in the fall, like definitely watch that series because it'll help you. But I think when you are planning as a first year teacher, and this was something I was told in my master's program, was to over plan. Like assume that it's not going to take you as long as you think it's going to take you to do the activity, because there's nothing worse than having 25, I mean, not really, I guess you could have them silently read, or as a veteran teacher, you could come up with something else. But as a new teacher and you have 25 minutes and your kids are just staring at you, that's incredibly intimidating. And you're like, what am I supposed to do with these kids? So I always over planned when I was first teaching. And I think that really helped me find success in the classroom, because I wasn't ever just sitting looking dumbfounded at my students, like I'm not sure what to do or where to go. And then that, kind of hurts your ego in a way as a teacher and makes you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. And my students are looking at me like I don't know what I'm doing. So I would always suggest to over plan, and then you can remove things. And if you don't get to a lesson, it's not the end of the world. No one's going to judge you for it. No one's going to, dock you points for it on some elusive, track that they keep track of you. Just over plan and be okay with not getting to everything. You really do need to be flexible in that regard. Something else that I will say for a new teacher is to look online. Google is your friend. There are plenty of lessons out there that do kind of follow a similar framework of the into, through, and beyond that you can find and then adjust to how you teach and how you want to see that kind of unfold in your classroom. So you utilize Google, utilize the resources that you have access to, because they really do help. And I've even utilized Google as a veteran teacher for a new unit that I'm planning. And it is helpful just to see what other teachers are doing in their classrooms.
That's awesome. I like that you talked about the flexibility and that over planning actually gives you flexibility. But I remember, in the past when I've done some over planning and then it's like, oh, darn, I really wanted to get to this activity that I had planned and now I don't get to use it. But you can always use it again in the future. Or like I would go to my colleagues and be like, hey guys, I made this really great activity. Do you want it? Like someone get some use out of it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's also what's great about having those flex days when you're doing your whole scope and sequence, is just having those empty days after every unit, so that, for example, you could go back and do that activity after you finish your unit. You could be like, hey guys, I have this really cool thing we didn't get to, but now we get to do it. And I think students appreciate that.
That's really awesome. Another thing that I like about you mentioning give those flex days is that when I was a starting teacher, I didn't give those flex days. And then all of a sudden I would feel behind and, oh no, we have to catch up. And that was really stressful for me and felt like I was rushing my students, and I didn't like that feeling. So that's such a great idea to just give yourself a couple days. There's always things that pop up. Always. So it's nice to have that freedom where you feel like you can address, say, the social emotional learning, something that comes up in your classroom that you really want to address and deal with in a way that isn't rushed. It gives you that freedom to do that and to create those relationships with your students when the time is right.
Yes. And something else that I do that kind of relates to this is, and I'll give you an example of at the end of the school year, this was my 10th year teaching, and I had 2 short story units planned for the very end of the school year. And I always do a short story at the end because it's engaging. Students, 8th graders in May are checked out, like they are already basically in high school. And so I always use short stories because they're short, they're sweet, they're to the point, and they can be really fun, And so I had 2 short story units planned, but because of certain things that happened in May with our school and just our community, I couldn't do one of them. Like I literally just did not have enough time. So we as a class voted on which short story the students wanted to do. And that's just what we taught at the end of the year. And it wasn't a big deal to just forget the other one. We just didn't do it. And no one's mad about that. Nothing happens to me as a result of not doing that short story unit. So I think giving yourself as a teacher, as a new teacher, especially that grace that it's okay to not do something. It's not going to be the end of the world. And don't put this unnecessary stress and pressure on yourself to do everything because you can't. Like it's not possible.
That's such good advice. I remember when I was in university, we were doing long-term planning, and in my background is in teaching science. So I was looking at the units, and in our curriculum, it says how much time you should allot for each unit, which is super helpful, except for when I went to actually put it on paper, I realized that we literally didn't have that many hours in the school year to do all the things that they suggested. So that's when I kind of realized, okay, so it's actually impossible to reach all the learning outcomes. And that's when you kind of have to be a professional and choose which ones are the most important and which ones are going to be the most important for them to know next year. And which ones will it be okay if we don't quite get to? And as much as you want to get to all the learning outcomes, all the standards, it isn't necessarily physically possible.
Right. Yes. That is very true. That's a great example.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been so helpful. I think our listeners are going to get so much value from what you shared today. And I'm really excited for them to watch your training series when it comes back out in the fall. We'll be sure to let our listeners know once that comes out, because I think it was very, very useful. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to our listeners before we finish?
Yeah, I think that what you guys are doing with your podcast and your blog and your, online professional development offerings that you have is incredibly powerful for teachers. And we started mindfulness at our school the past 3 years. And I totally bought into it. Like I love mindfulness. I'm very much into the kind of that world. And to see the effect that it had on my students and to see that effect that it had on me in my life was incredibly profound. And this last year that I was teaching was the most calm and rational, I guess you could say, in approaching certain situations. I wasn't stressed out when parents were upset about something or contacting me mad about something. It didn't stress me out because I was okay with the emotions that I felt in myself. I wasn't judgmental of how I was feeling about certain things, and I'd sit with those emotions, and then I'd be able to move past them and come to a solution. And it was very just this sense of peace almost this whole school year, which I didn't think was a possibility. And so to see that transpire and to actually experience that for myself, I really think speaks volumes about how important bringing the practice of mindfulness into your life is. And so if you haven't taken the full leap into it yet, I would urge you to do so because it has made just an incredible difference in my life.
Well, thank you for saying that. And our goal with what we do and where we feel that we're here to support teachers and students is that we've created the program. So I know it can be very overwhelming for teachers to think, oh, mindfulness, how do I teach that to my students? How do I make the lessons for this? Well, we have covered that. All of the lessons, all of the guided audios that fit into a real life classroom are all ready for the entire year. No prep required, by just going to educom.com, and you guys can start your free trial. So you can try it out, see if it works for you, enjoy it. There's no end date to the free trial. You have access to it forever. And then if you enjoy it, you can get our full year curriculum by signing up and joining our community. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So I know our listeners are going to want to keep in touch with you after this episode and follow you. Where can they follow you?
They can follow us mostly on Instagram is where we are very visible. So we are at EB Academics. And if you send me a direct message, you have questions, I will always respond. So don't feel like you can't reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. So if you follow us on Instagram, you'll know then when we are releasing our Balanced Teaching Approach workshop again in the fall. And you'll be able to see kind of all of the offerings that we have for teaching middle school English language arts. You can also find us on our podcast, which is Teaching Middle School ELA. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. And then our blog is ebacademics.com. So if you type in EB Academics anywhere, you'll basically find us.
Perfect. And we'll link all of those in our show notes as well at podcast.educalm.com. So it's perfect. They can listen to our podcast on Monday and then you on Tuesday.
Excellent. I love it.
Awesome, Caitlin. Thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your knowledge with our community today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, friends. Hopefully you got some awesome takeaways from this episode and you're feeling inspired and excited to sit down, lay your year out in front of you and lesson plan ahead of time so that you can reduce the day-to-day stress by having a year-long plan. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and be sure to check back in with us next week because we're going to be teaching you how to introduce mindfulness into your classroom for the first time. We're going to teach you the exact lesson that we use when we're teaching this for the first time so that you can have a really smooth start to your mindfulness practice in the classroom. All right, have an awesome week. Worry, stress, and anxiety are a reality in today's schools. When students are distracted, their brains aren't ready for learning. Getting them to calm down and focus can feel impossible. Don't feel helpless, frustrated, or overwhelmed any longer. Get Educalm Classroom, our online mindfulness program that's transforming classrooms and improving student wellness and learning. With Educalm Classroom, students and teachers learn concrete strategies and common vocabulary to manage emotions and behaviors. They both leave the classroom better equipped to overcome life's challenges. In your Educalm Classroom membership, you'll get a full year of ready-to-use audio, video, and printable mindfulness lessons for the classroom, plus access to a caring and supportive community of like-minded teachers. Try Educalm Classroom for free by going to www.educalm.com. Educalm is spelled EDUCALME. Thrive in a calm learning atmosphere.